So we will now turn to you, Bhante. Thank you. Good morning to all. We're continuing with our chapter 8 on dependent origination and conditional relations. This is being recorded, so we will be able to send you part 1 and part 2 in about a week from now. And I will also share this on Facebook Live, Bhante, because people who are not in this forum we're actually participating in different parts of the country, and so yeah, I'm going to also share this on Facebook Live.
Okay. Should I take over now?
Yes, Bhante, please.
Oh, okay. So thank you, and to everybody, either good afternoon, good morning, perhaps some good evening, maybe some good night. And so we will be continuing our examination of Chapter 8 of the Comprehensive Manual, but I've had a change of intention. Rather than take the section on conditional relations, which is very technical, very specialized, and without a very thorough grounding in all of the details of the Abhidhamma, it's rather difficult to understand. What I thought I would do is to continue to explore dependent origination in more detail with more elaborations. And so I had prepared a file. Let me share the screen. So is this file called Difficult Links in Dependent Origination? Is this visible?
Yes, it is, Bhante.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is to go through this file, which hopefully it will give us some more sort of a more precise and more detailed understanding of the relations between these, some of the more intricate links in the formula of dependent origination. I think I could make this full screen. Okay, how is the size of the font?
This size is good, Bhante.
Okay, so let's look through some of my notes here. These were notes that I compiled some years ago, and I made some revisions this morning. Okay, so we start off with ignorance as a condition for Sankhara, the karmic formations or volitional activities. And here I bring in some of the conditions from the scheme of conditional relations. So we say that ignorance or avidya is a co-nascent condition. I'll explain these terms as we go, mutuality condition and a root condition for the volitions in unwholesome states of consciousness. So these volitions, the volitions in these states of consciousness, are sankhara conditioned by ignorance. So what is meant by co-nascent condition? I think the word co-nascent is probably, there's an expression that's been used called hybrid Buddhist English. So it's a word which means co along with, and nascent is born. So maybe an easier word to use would be co-arisen condition. So these are states that arise together, dharmas that arise together simultaneously. And so in the unwholesome chittas, the unwholesome states of consciousness, ignorance under the name delusion is always present in all unwholesome states of consciousness. And all unwholesome states of consciousness have a volition. The volition is chaitana. So so moha or delusion and the chaitana arise together. So in this way, I should say, ignorance and the unwholesome volitions arise together. So in this way, ignorance is a co-arisen condition, a co-arising condition for the sankharas in the unwholesome states of consciousness. And also the two, ignorance and the volition, are mutuality conditions. That is, they support each other in the same state of consciousness. Ignorance sort of supports the arising of the volition, and the volition also supports and maintains the ignorance. It's just like if you take two poles and you put them on the ground so that each one is supporting the other. We could say that those two poles are mutuality conditions for maintaining each other in an upright position. So ignorance and volition not only not only arise together, but they also support each other. So they are each a mutuality condition for the other. And ignorance is the same as moha, delusion, and moha is one of the roots. Remember, there are three unwholesome roots: lobha, dosa, moha. Moha is delusion, and so delusion is a root condition. The root condition applies to those mental factors that function as roots: delusion, greed, hatred, delusion on the unwholesome side, non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion on the wholesome side. Whoops. Okay, then in relation to wholesome, the volitions in the wholesome states of consciousness, in the wholesome states of consciousness, delusion is not present. It's not manifestly present. Instead, what is present in wholesome states of consciousness is the beautiful roots of non-greed, non-hatred, and if there's wisdom in that wholesome state, non-delusion. But still, ignorance lies latent or dormant even in the wholesome states of consciousness, in the mundane wholesome states of consciousness. So we can say that ignorance is an underlying tendency behind or underlying the volitions in the mundane wholesome states of consciousness. So these wholesome volitions too are sankhara conditioned by ignorance. So in this way, ignorance is the condition for unwholesome and mundane wholesome chittas. Ignorance is the condition for the sankharas in unwholesome and in mundane wholesome states of consciousness. So in this way, these volitions, these are the sankhara conditioned by ignorance. Okay, then we come to the second link that we'll be concerned with. This is sankhara pachaya vijnanam, sankhara as a condition for consciousness. So sankhara consists in unwholesome and mundane wholesome volitions. Now, I've divided this under several headings. So during the course of life, the sankhara are a condition for all the karmically active states of consciousness. And sankhara are a condition for these states of consciousness. This would be also by way of co-arisen condition and mutuality condition. Yeah, I say this. So in the language of the Abhidhamma, from this perspective, the Sankhara is a co-nascent or co-arisen condition, and the mutuality condition for the associated state of consciousness. So to elaborate, all chittas, all states of consciousness that create karma are accompanied by a volition that is either unwholesome or mundane wholesome. And so the Sankhara will be a co-arisen condition and a mutuality condition for the consciousness, the state of consciousness in which it arises. So this is simultaneous, we could say simultaneous conditioning. And now we come to conditioning spread out over time. Maybe we could call this maybe we'll call it temporally discrete conditioning, where there's a difference in time. So at death, one sankhara generated in the course of life takes on the role of generating rebirth into the new existence. That sankhara governs the rebirth process. And it does so by serving as the condition for the rebirth consciousness. We could say the productive condition for the rebirth consciousness. So the sankhara takes on the role of generating or producing the rebirth consciousness. And technically, in the terms of the Abhidhamma, we would say this sankhara is a upanisya pachaya. That is, it's a decisive support condition, a strong supporting condition, operating from the past time into the present. And also that sankhara is what generates the karma. So that sankhara is also a karma condition. And then during the course of life, I should say, so after rebirth has taken place and we're going through our life, other sankhara then ripen, come to maturity, and they bring forth the karma resultant states of consciousness, the vipaka chittas. So in this way too, the sankharas are conditions for consciousness through a gap in time. Sankharas of the past, from the past life, condition the arising of resultant states of consciousness in this life, and the sankharas we generate in this life through our karma will generate or produce resultant states of consciousness in future lives. Okay, now it gets rather thorny because it becomes very complicated now. So here we have consciousness as the condition for nama rupa. We'll render it mentality, materiality. And then here I made the distinction between what I call the developmental perspective. That is from the standpoint of the development of an organism from rebirth, developing into life, and then an analytical perspective. So this is a way of looking at our experience as it's continuing at any given, or as it's taking place at any given moment. Okay, so from the developmental perspective, we want to see how consciousness is a condition for nama-rupa, mentality, materiality. Okay, so rebirth linking takes place when consciousness links up with the newly fertilized ovum. This is in the case of a human rebirth, where we have the fertilized ovum, and then at some point, we don't know exactly at what point in the development of the embryo, consciousness will sort of settle in and establish itself within that fertilized ovum. So the consciousness comes from a being that had passed away earlier. And remember, consciousness is not like a soul that preserves its identity, but it's an ever-changing process. But that process links up with the fertilized ovum. And then nama-rupa is the psychophysical organism that appears on the occasion of rebirth. And so nama-rupa becomes manifest in dependence on this consciousness. So if consciousness does not link up with the fertilized ovum, then there's no manifestation of the living being. It's just a fertilized ovum, and if consciousness doesn't connect at all, probably the ovum will just expire and no conception will take place. But it's when consciousness links up or settles into the ovum that the living being comes into existence. And the living being, looked at analytically, is the nexus or the assemblage of consciousness and nama-rupa. And so nama-rupa becomes manifest in dependence on this consciousness. And throughout the period of gestation in the womb, and then after physical birth, throughout the course of life, nama-rupa, mentality, materiality, can continue only as long as consciousness continues. And just to give an illustration of this with reference to a sutta, whoops. Yeah, I had a passage from the Mahanidana Sutta, which I translated under the title, The Great Discourse on Causation. It was vying for the position of a New York Times bestseller back in 1984. Unfortunately, it never rose up anywhere from close to the bottom of the list. Okay, so anyway, here the Buddha is in conversation with Venerable Ananda, and he says, with consciousness as condition, there is mentality, materiality. How is that to be understood? If consciousness does not descend into the mother's womb, would mentality, materiality, nama-rupa, take shape in the womb? Ananda says, surely not, Venerable. And then if after descending into the womb, consciousness were to depart, if the stream of consciousness were to be cut off, would mentality, materiality come out into this present existence? Again, certainly not. So, and then if the consciousness of a young boy or girl were to be cut off, would mentality, materiality, this complex of mind and body, be able to grow up, develop, and reach maturity? Again, certainly not. So in this way, we could see that consciousness is the cause, the source, the origin, the condition for mentality, materiality, nama rupa. Okay, so that's consciousness as a condition for mentality, materiality from the developmental perspective. Now we take the analytical perspective, the way we look at any given occasion of experience. Okay, so on any occasion of experience, we say again, consciousness is a condition for nama rupa. So it's a condition for nama insofar as the 5 factors of nama. Remember yesterday we went through this. What is nama? According to the suttas, it's feeling, perception, volition, contact, and attention. So those are the essential factors of mental activity that go along with consciousness. So these 5 factors are dependent on consciousness, and they can't occur without consciousness. If there's no consciousness, then no feeling, no perception, no volition, no contact, no attention. And then consciousness is also actually this should be condition. Consciousness is also a condition for rupa, for the material body, because this body only functions as a living body when there is consciousness. Even in sleep, even though there's no awareness of the outer world, but the bhavanga consciousness is still flowing on. So if consciousness departs from the body, we could say that there's still a material object there, but it is no longer that material object. The corpse is not part of nama rupa. It's just a mass of inanimate matter. So in this way, we say that consciousness is the condition for nama rupa. And then in a number of suttas, it's also said nama rupa is a condition for consciousness. And so this also can be understood from the same 2 perspectives. From the developmental perspective, so in order for consciousness to start the new life, it has to, in a sense, get a footing, a foothold in nama rupa. In the case of a human life, this means that consciousness must connect to a fertilized ovum, which then provides or serves as the material basis, the rupa in the complex nama rupa. And when consciousness arises based on the fertilized ovum, then it will be inevitably is accompanied by a feeling, perception, volition, contact, and attention, even at that first moment when consciousness arises in the womb. How that takes place, well, I don't know, but there's probably very primitive, very, very elementary feeling, volition, contact, and some kind of active attention. And those together constitute nama. And then throughout the whole process of embryonic or fetal development, consciousness will always depend upon a viable embryo or viable fetus. In that case, consciousness depends on nama rupa as its supporting condition. And again, looking in the great discourse on causation, here the Buddha says, with mentality, materiality as condition, there is consciousness. How is this to be understood? If consciousness were not to gain a footing, that's the expression used, to become established in mentality, materiality. So mentality, materiality is the kind of support for consciousness. Would there be the origination of this whole mass of dukkha, of birth, old age, and death? Would that be possible? Ananda says, surely not, Venerable. And so then the Buddha says, so that is the cause, source, origin, and condition for consciousness, namely mentality, materiality. Okay, so this is from the developmental perspective. Then again, looking at the same relationship from the analytical perspective. So on any occasion of experience throughout life, consciousness depends on nama rupa, mentality, materiality. So in human life, consciousness arises based on the physical body. It depends on a particular sense faculty, the nervous system, the brain, and the entire bodily organism. So all of that constitutes rupa, material form. And again, on any occasion of experience, consciousness is always accompanied by its mental adjuncts, its mental factors, feeling, perception, volition, contact, and attention, that is by nama. And so the relationship, again, between nama and consciousness is that of co-nascence, co-arising, and mutuality. The two are supports for each other. In the case of the relationship between consciousness and rupa, the relationship is somewhat more complex, and I won't go into the details. But in a general way, we could say that the living body and consciousness are interdependent. Okay, then it said that nama rupa, mentality, materiality, is the condition for the 6 sense bases. So remember, the 6 sense bases are eye, ear, to the mind base. Okay, so remember nama, feeling, perception, volition, contact, attention, rupa, the 4 primary elements, and then the various kinds of material form dependent on the 4 great elements, including color, odor, taste, some kind of nutritive capacity. In the case of a living body, vitality, and so on. Okay, now taking it first from the developmental perspective. So rebirth linking, as we said, takes place when consciousness connects or settles into the newly fertilized ovum, which starts the new existence. And the consciousness, oh, this is just repeating what I said earlier. So the consciousness comes from a being who had passed away earlier, and nama rupa is the psychophysical organism arising at the first moment of the new life. And now on this occasion, the 4 great elements and various kinds of dependent material form making up rupa are the support for the body sense base, which comes into existence at the very first moment of the new life. So at the moment of when a new being appears as in the human existence, we have the body, this is Abhidhamma term, the body decad, the heart decad, and there's supposed to be three oh yeah, the sex determination. Okay, so the decad means that there are the the decad. So we have four primary elements, four secondaries. This is color, odor, taste, and nutritive essence. Plus vitality, plus X, where in the first case, the X is the body faculty, the ability to experience touch sensations. In the case of the heart decad, the heart, the 10th factor is the heart base, the kind of matter that serves as the physical support for mind or consciousness. And in the sex decad, the 10th factor is the sex determination, either male or female, or perhaps there can be some cases of an intermediate determination. So in any case, what we're concerned with here is the body sense base, which is in the body decad. So there arises the body sense base, which comes into being at the very beginning of the new life. And then these four great elements and the other types of dependent matter become supports for the other sense bases, the eye, ear, nose, and tongue bases, when these gradually emerge as the embryo develops. And so we're trying to explain again, nama rupa as a condition for the six sense bases. So here we see how rupa here is a condition for the emergence of the five physical sense bases, body, and then gradually eye, ear, nose, and tongue bases. And then the first moment of consciousness of the new life is also what counts as the mind base. So consciousness is the mind base, and consciousness is conditioned by nama, by feeling, perception, volition, contact, and attention. And so the mind base in relation to dependent origination is the resultant types of consciousness. And what's especially relevant here is the consciousness that serves as rebirth linking and bhavanga. And so this rebirth consciousness is conditioned by the factors of nama. So this rebirth consciousness, which is the mind base, is conditioned by the factors of nama. So in this way, nama rupa is a condition for the six sense bases. So that's from the developmental perspective. Now, from an analytical perspective, so on any given occasion of experience, the 6 sense bases depend on nama rupa. So first, we have the 5 physical sense bases are dependent on material form. The 5 physical sense bases themselves are types of material form. And these 5 physical sense bases are identified as the sensitive types of matter within the gross physical sense organs. So what we call the eye base is a type of material substance within the eye organ, a type of substance that is sensitive to light, to colors. The ear base is a sensitive type of substance within the physical ear that can receive sounds, that perceives vibrations of the air as sounds. And similarly for the nose, the tongue, and the sensitive body, maybe the touch, tactile nerves of the body. And so these sensitive types of matter all depend on the 4 primary elements and the other types of dependent matter. And so in this way, the 5 physical sense bases are dependent on material form. If the physical body dies, then the 5 physical sense bases also perish. You can hold maybe pictures by Rembrandt or Picasso in front of the eyes of a corpse, and the eye won't see anything because the eye is not functioning as an organ of sight. And you can play the most beautiful concerts in the presence of a corpse, but the corpse won't hear anything because the ear is no longer functioning as a sense base. So the 5 physical sense bases are dependent upon the living physical organism with all of its component types of matter. And then the mind base or consciousness is dependent on material form. So in human existence, consciousness occurs in dependence on a body, and the body is made up of the 4 elements and other types of matter. So the body is Rupa, and consciousness depends on Rupa. So the mind base depends on material form. And then the 5 physical sense bases are also in a way dependent on nama. And so on an occasion, for example, on an occasion of seeing, the factors of nama, feeling, perception, and so on, that exist along with eye consciousness depend on the eye. So strictly speaking, it is not the case that the eye depends on the factors of nama, on the mental factors, but we can say that the eye can function as an eye, as an organ of sight, only when there is feeling, perception, volition, contact, and attention. So in this sense, we could say that the eye is dependent on nama, and the same holds true for the physical sense bases, for the other physical sense bases. Okay, then we have the mind base is dependent on nama. And so remember that the mind base is another term for consciousness. And so we already showed earlier that consciousness is dependent on nama. And so the same explanation applies here, that the mind base depends on nama, or that nama is a condition for the mind base. So in this way, when we look through all of this in detail, we see that nama rupa, name and form, mentality, materiality, is the condition for the 6 sense bases, both on the occasion of rebirth and also during the course of existence. Okay, then we are going to jump down now to the lower part of the sequence of dependent origination, coming down towards the end, because once we get to the 6 sense bases, then it's no problem to understand that these 6 sense bases are a condition for contact. Contact is a condition for feeling. Feeling is a condition for craving. Craving is a condition for clinging. So those are all pretty self-evident. But now we have clinging as the condition for bhava, for existence. So that requires some more detailed explanation. So first, when we speak of clinging, according to the suttas, there are 4 types of clinging. Sensual clinging, or clinging to sensual pleasures, clinging to views, clinging to rules and observances. And remember, I explained yesterday that that is like attachment to the idea that by following certain rules and undertaking certain ascetic practices, one can gain enlightenment and liberation. And then the 4th is the clinging to a view of self, a doctrine of self. And number 3, the 3rd and 4th types of clinging are also types of views. And so clinging to views means clinging to all other wrong views apart from these 2, which are singled out probably because they were very prominent during the time of the Buddha among the rival groups of Brahmins and ascetics. So we have 4 types of clinging, which can be reduced to 2 mental factors. Sensual clinging is a mode or an aspect of greed, and the other types of clinging are aspects of views. Okay, so let's try to exemplify this relationship. Okay, so here we take sensual clinging. And so here we have, because of clinging to sensual pleasures, somebody might break the precepts. So to get more sensual pleasures, they'll kill, steal, commit adultery, seduce minors, slander others, tell damaging lies, and commit all sorts of unwholesome deeds. And so through these deeds, they're creating unwholesome karma. This would be volitions that make up karma existence, as a result of which the person will be reborn in a bad destination in their next life. So that is rebirth existence. Remember, yesterday we looked at the Abhidhamma text called the Vibhanga, which divides existence into 2 types: karma karma existence, the the side of life in which we create karma, and rebirth existence, the state, excuse me, I'm losing my voice, the state into which we're reborn and which we live in as a result of past karma. So by breaking the precepts, the person generates unwholesome volitions, which constitute karma existence. And then as a result of that comes rebirth existence, which is getting reborn in a bad state of existence, a bad realm of rebirth. Okay, somebody might hold the right view of karma and its fruits. So they have some understanding that one's deeds will produce some results leading to another state of existence. Maybe they don't have to be a Buddhist, but maybe they are a Christian and believe that, say, through good deeds, one will be reborn and, well, one will be, after death, one will go to heaven and enjoy the bliss of heaven in the company of God. And so they want to enjoy the bliss and pleasures of heaven, which is a kind of subtle clinging to sensual pleasures. And so for the purpose of reaping that reward, they practice giving, they observe the precepts, they try to adhere to or develop such qualities as kindness, compassion towards others. And so through those activities, they're creating good karma. They're generating wholesome volitions, which would be their good karma existence. And as a result of that, the person will be reborn in a good destination, maybe in one of the heavenly realms. So that will be rebirth existence. So here we could see how clinging to sense pleasures brings about the karma existence in the form of the wholesome activities, and the rebirth existence as rebirth into a good destination. Okay, then we have clinging to views. Okay, somebody might adopt a wrong view. He holds there's no result of action. We can do whatever we want, and at death, just the body breaks up and nothing continues beyond death. And so we only have 60, 70, 80 years to make the full enjoyment of this life. So no need to follow any kind of ethical precepts. Just get as much pleasure as we can. So the person violates doesn't even know what precepts are. They engage in a lot of unwholesome activities. They generate unwholesome karma formations, and then they're reborn into a bad destination, the plane of misery. So here, clinging to a wrong view conditions karmic existence, which conditions rebirth existence in a bad mode of rebirth. But somebody might adopt the right view and cling to that view that there is a result of karma. And on that basis, they keep the precepts, they engage in wholesome activities, accumulate wholesome good karma, and then they're reborn in a happy destination. So that's a fortunate rebirth existence. Okay, then clinging to rules and observances. So somebody might hold a view that following a particular ascetic practice leads to enlightenment and liberation, and then they engage in those practices, and this will create karma leading to future existence. Whether it's a good future or a bad future depends on the kind of activity. But if it's inflicting pain and misery on oneself, probably it will lead to a bad future rebirth. Okay, then we have clinging to a doctrine of self. So somebody might have the view of a finite self that is annihilated at death. And so they lead the life of worldly enjoyment. They engage in unwholesome activities, unwholesome karma, leading to rebirth in a bad destination. Somebody might have the view that we're created by God and that they might aspire for heaven after death. And so they cling to this view of self and they lead a moral life. And then this creates good karma that leads to a good rebirth in the sense sphere. Or they might even start practicing types of meditation or contemplative prayer that brings meditative absorption, and that creates a very powerful wholesome karma that could even lead to rebirth in the fine material sphere. So it seems that if we look at the Christian mystics, the Sufi mystics, the Hindu yogis, so they have meditative practices, whether called prayer or contemplation, that bring states of samadhi that correspond to the jhanas. And so we could reasonably believe that they're going to be reborn in the divine realms of the fine material sphere. Or they might hold a view of an infinite, eternal self. And then based on that view, they develop certain meditative practices that bring samadhi, and that creates wholesome karma that could lead to rebirth in the fine material realm or the immaterial realm. Okay, we'll go just a little further, then we can take some questions. Okay, now we have existence as the condition for birth. So when we make this statement, then existence, or Pali bhava, is karmically active existence. That is kama bhava, the karma capable of generating existence in any of the three realms, any of the three realms of existence. And then existence that takes place in these realms is called rebirth existence. And that includes birth, growth, aging, and death. So rebirth existence is the entire passive side of our life resulting from prior karma. So when we say existence is the condition for birth, this is to say that karmically active existence is the condition for birth, or that karmically active existence is the condition for rebirth existence. And then to explain this in greater detail, so first we have sense sphere existence, sense sphere karmic existence, conditioning birth. So sense sphere karma can be divided into unwholesome karma. So this would be the 10 ways of unwholesome action: killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, malicious speech, angry speech, gossip, thoughts of covetousness, thoughts of ill will, and wrong view. So this unwholesome karma produces birth in the three planes of misery: the hells, the realm of afflicted spirits, the animal realm. Then the good karma, ordinary wholesome karma, generates birth in the 7 fortunate planes, back into the human realm or into the 6 sense sphere heavenly worlds. Then fine material sphere existence. So this is fine material sphere karmic existence. This as a condition for birth. So what is meant by fine material sphere karma existence are the four jhanas. So when these jhanas are attained, mastered, and retained up to the time of death, then they lead to rebirth in the fine material realm, which we saw some months ago is divided into four main levels corresponding to the four jhanas. And then immaterial sphere karma existence as a condition for birth. So what is meant by immaterial sphere karma existence are the four immaterial or formless attainments. That is the base of infinite space, base of infinite consciousness, base of nothingness, base of neither perception nor non-perception. And when those are attained and mastered, they lead to rebirth in one of the four immaterial planes that correspond to the four immaterial attainments. And so that takes us through these elaboration of these difficult links in dependent origination. Now maybe we could take some questions, including maybe the questions that were left over from yesterday.
Yes, Bhante, there are a lot of questions. I think I'll just run through them. They are, some are kind of going to loop back. It says in the manual, ignorance and craving are the weakest factors. Well, the most promising places to cease samsara. Is cutting any of the other factors, for example, the six sense bases, another place one might cease samsara, or is it only in craving and clinging? Those are the two, as I understand.
Did it say in the manual that ignorance and craving are the weakest factors?
Weakest links, I think.
Weakest links.
And that's the question. I'm not sure it does actually, but I mean,
yeah, I don't think
I
I
have
would have
often heard that said.
I don't think I would have said that. What I would say is that ignorance and craving are the most fundamental roots. And so to overcome samsara, one has to overcome craving and ignorance. And between the two of them, ignorance is the more fundamental. So ignorance is the underlying ground of craving. I say that craving is sort of the propeller that propels the round of rebirth, or the driving force. But craving depends upon ignorance, is not seeing the true nature of things, the real nature of things. And so to gain liberation, one has to overcome ignorance. And then the means for overcoming ignorance is wisdom, or clear, penetrative insight into the nature of things. Yeah, so eventually one has to come to the development of wisdom, panya or prajna, to eliminate ignorance.
Thank you, Bhante. Then there's a question here. Could you please comment on the chain reaction of volitional formations that lead to a series of karma-related events? Would it be correct to say that dependent origination is the chain reaction of existence and samsara?
Chain reaction.
Yeah, I guess it, the dependent chain.
Well, of course, it's sort of, I mean, this is, according to Buddha's teaching, this is what has been going on through beginningless time, is that we're motivated by the defilements. In fact, that's what really is really shown by the three rounds. Let me get them up. So we have the three rounds of ignorance, craving, and clinging. That's the round of defilements. From that comes the round of karma, the various karmic formations, and that brings the round of results. And then once the results become manifest, then usually we just respond to these results, to our passive experience by way of the defilements. If the results are favorable, we cling to them with greed and we try to hold on to them or get more of them. If the results are disagreeable, then we respond with aversion and try to push them away or to destroy the obstacles. And in that way, we generate more karma, which brings more results. And then again, we respond with defilements, with karma, which brings more results. So in that way, it goes around in a cyclic pattern. So maybe that will correspond to the chain reaction.
Yes. In terms of the 10th link existence, could it also be called karmic action? I know it's sometimes called becoming rather than existence. It's rather a strange term, existence.
Yeah. It's just a matter of choice as far as the rendering. The problem is that we don't really have anything that quite corresponds to bhava in English, though it's a very simple word. So I would say that bhava, I would say it's concrete individual existence with the two aspects, the aspect or two phases, the phase in which we are generating new karma, and then the phase in which we are receiving or experiencing the results of our past accumulations of karma.
I see. So would it be something like, that Frank Sinatra song, I Did It My Way? Would that be bhava?
I think I heard the title. I don't think I know the lyrics of the
The
song.
lyrics are all about, how I lived it my own way, and this is how my life was. It's all kind of a big sort of talk about how you do what you want, basically.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe.
Okay. So the second question says here, can you give an example, this is about clinging, of non-existence in daily life? And there's a related question that says, can craving for non-existence be like taking drugs to mentally numb out and avoid an unpleasant situation and the bad feelings that come with it? Would that be an example of non-existence?
Maybe in contemporary terms, it might be an example, but I'm not sure that that is what the Buddhist texts have in mind when they speak about the craving for non-existence. And I have to say that this is one aspect, among several, which are not perfectly clear to me. But the way the craving for non-existence seems to have been interpreted, the way I can pull it out from some of the suttas, in the Buddha's time, there were groups of ascetics who maybe they accepted the idea of rebirth, but they had also a belief in a self that is reborn from life to life. And they thought that the way to liberation is to annihilate that self. And when you annihilate the self, then there's nothing beyond that. So they see the ultimate goal is to annihilate the existent self and then reach a state of complete nothingness.
All right. Okay, so this could be a technical thing rather than a... Okay.
It seems to be formulated against the background of the ascetic systems or philosophical beliefs of the Buddha's time.
Right.
But if we want to give it, to give some meaning to that idea against the background of a contemporary culture, maybe we could say that it's the attempt sort of to blot out consciousness by using drugs that make us numb and dull. And some say, as an example of craving for non-existence, the force that can drive a person to commit suicide. If, when they're having a great deal of depression, misery, and they try to escape that misery by taking their own life.
Right.
But I'm not sure that's what the Buddhist text originally intended.
Then we have some questions on this issue of volition and consciousness.
Yeah.
Can you comment a bit more on volition preceding consciousness? For example, how does ignorance give rise to volition prior to the arising of consciousness?
Yeah, for that we have to remember, as I said yesterday, let me see if I could find. That these factors are always interwoven and interdependent. Yeah, I say the 12 factors are always present together in any single life, mutually implicative, that is like mutually bound up with each other and interpenetrating. So it's not the case that there is ignorance and volition prior to consciousness. Ignorance and volition always occur in association with consciousness. But the way this formula is laid out, it's the ignorance and volition from one life occurring together with the consciousness in that life. But it's that ignorance and the volitional activities that bring into being the arising of consciousness in the new existence.
I see.
So all along there's consciousness, but when death takes place, what is it that drives the stream of consciousness from the person that has passed away to start off into a rebirth, to start off a new process of existence? It's because there's that underlying ignorance together with craving, and then what determines the stream of consciousness to arrive at a particular mode of rebirth will be the volitional activities or karma.
So there's another question here, which actually is very similar. Is there a temporal sequence between contact and feeling? First contact, then feeling, and other mental factors. Would you give a similar answer to that too?
In this case, the relationship between contact and feeling is instantaneous. Like, is maybe we could say in our ordinary experience, maybe a split second between the contact and the feeling. So in Abhidhamma terms, it's said that contact and feeling are co-nascent, co-arisen. So whenever the contact takes place, immediately a feeling arises based on that contact, together with that contact. But what we might say is that when a contact takes place, one kind of feeling arises immediately in immediate association with that contact, but that contact will trigger a series of feelings which are responses to that particular kind of contact. And so let us say, okay, I look out the window and I see some troublemaking person, a troublemaker coming. I see that he's coming to visit me. So there's eye contact. So I see the form of that person, and immediately with that contact, an unpleasant feeling will arise. A painful feeling will arise. But then I continue to dwell and watch the person getting closer and closer. And so there's continuing contact, and then more disagreeable feelings are arising through that contact.
So, I mean, in defense of this translation of codependent co-arising,
Yeah.
is that possibly how people get this idea that it's kind of strange how dependent origination is not really dependent origination. It's got this parallelism in it as well, as if it's codependent origination, co-arising origination.
Yeah, we could say that. Yeah.
You could say that. Okay.
Yeah.
Then relating back to the chitta vritti, Are the Javana chittas the only point where samskaras make karma? Is that correct?
Yeah, that would be correct. Yeah.
Okay. And then related to that, is the system of rebirth linking a dualistic view? Is it like a kind of, you've got a matter and a consciousness like dualistic pair?
Yeah, I would say definitely it's a kind of dualism. But in Western philosophy, the dualism is formulated by way of two types of substances. So there's a mental substance and a material substance. And then the problem is, how does one formulate the relationship between the mental substance and the material substance? Are the two sort of potentially independent substances which have somehow become locked in this binding relationship with each other? So in Buddhism, I would say definitely there's the difference between the mental side of experience and the material side of experience. And then the system of conditional relations is intended to try to explain, or to at least to stipulate the relationships that take place between the mental side of experience and the material side of experience. To give some examples of this. Okay, so at the moment of rebirth linking, it's said that the mental side and the material side are co-arisen. They arise together, and they are mutuality conditions. So at the moment of rebirth, the material base, that's the fertilized ovum, is the supporting condition for the mental process. And it is the mental process which is the supporting condition for the material form. It's what makes the material substance a living material organism. So in the course of rebirth linking, the material side and the mental side arise together and are mutually supportive conditions. But in the course of life, the relationships become more complex. So to give an example, on an occasion of sight, of seeing a form, the eye base is constantly arising and passing away. But the eye base has to have already arisen and be in the stage of presence, the middle stage, in order to serve as a support for eye consciousness.
Well, I mean, Bhante, then the question comes up, why does the ovum have to be fertilized for consciousness to link up with it? Isn't that a problem? Because in a sense, it's a bit like dualism. You have to have a point where consciousness interacts. And now you're saying a fertilized ovum. Why? Why does it have to be fertilized?
I would assume because it needs life in order for the consciousness to be able to enter in and to form the organism.
But so is life independent of life force, independent of consciousness? Is it a separate entity of some sort? I mean, it's a very kind of odd way of explaining.
Yeah, these are like issues that are not really dealt with in the Buddhist texts.
Yes.
So I would just have to sort of offer my own conjectures. So my conjecture would be that, I don't have any background in biology, let alone in reproductive biology. But I would assume that the ovum can be alive before the rebirth consciousness settles into it. And maybe it has to be alive to serve as a base for the rebirth consciousness. If the ovum has been fertilized, but then it passes, it dies in the womb, then maybe it's not suitable, then it won't be suitable to serve as a base for the rebirth consciousness to connect with it.
Right. Okay, Bhante.
But if there are any biologists here, or especially those specializing in reproductive biology, then please forgive any errors on my part. It's not my area.
I mean, obviously, that's the problem that dualism has. It's exactly
Yeah.
the same way as Descartes says it was in the pineal gland in the brain. There has to be a point where they contact each other, and here you've got a fertilized ovum. But of course, it's still got the same difficulty that, why that, not somewhere else, is the sort of question that comes up if you're speaking from the scientific side. I mean, we don't have to go there. I'm just...
Yeah.
In the fourth jhana, does the bhavanga stop? Or put another way around, could you relate the analytical view of consciousness to what occurs in the jhana states?
Okay. In any process of active consciousness, the bhavanga is not occurring.
Okay.
So when we're seeing, talking, listening, in those active phases of consciousness, the bhavanga is not occurring. The bhavanga occurs in those, during our waking hours, it occurs in those tiny little spaces between active processes. So there's a constant falling into the bhavanga and emerging. But then when the meditator enters into a jhana for a sustained period of time, then there's a continuous series of javana chittas of the jhanic level. And so there's no bhavanga occurring within the jhana itself. But when the jhana is finished, then the mind will go back into the bhavanga temporarily.
I see. Thank you, Bhante. Then there's a question about nama. There's a number of questions here, and it really relates to consciousness. Here's the first one. What is the difference between consciousness and feeling, perception, volition, contact, and attention? Is nama are these terms, nama, not just the functions of consciousness? Like, how can you have consciousness separate from feeling, perception, volition, contact, and attention? Aren't they just features of consciousness?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, it's one of the sort of reservations that I have a bit about the way the Abhidhamma treats the mind, in that it seems sometimes almost to be treating it as though, okay, let us say, to use an analogy, as though you have a box of eggs and, like a dozen eggs. So you have the box, the cardboard box, and within that box, you could take out 1 egg, 2 eggs, 3 eggs, as though the eggs are, something separate from the box. And you put the eggs and the box together, and then you have a box of eggs. So it seems a little bit sometimes that the Abhidhamma is treating the mind in that way. But so the way I prefer to see it is, in fact, to see things like feeling, perception, volitions, attention, to be functions of consciousness, or functions of, or activities of consciousness. And for purposes of convenience, they're sort of separated out and treated as chaitasikas, mental factors. But when you look at them, and you could see that there are these different aspects to conscious experience, an aspect by which we experience things as being agreeable or disagreeable, an aspect in which we single out the distinctive features of the object, an aspect in which we make we respond in some way to the object. And so we could say that the mental factors, the chaitasikas, are these different ways in which we relate, in which consciousness relates to the object. And so as a matter of convenience, they are singled out and treated sort of as entities in their own right. But if we want to look at them organically and integrally, we should see them as actual just functions or modalities of consciousness. That would be my own personal approach.
Thank you, Bhante. I mean, of course, then it raises the next question. You mentioned how.
I lost your voice.
Sorry, Bhante. You mentioned that consciousness is dependent on nama rupa.
Yeah.
And this, so you have the problem. If nama is consciousness, it can't be dependent on it. It is consciousness.
Well, let us say that let us say that consciousness cannot occur without those functions. So you say whenever consciousness occurs, it has to be experiencing the felt tone. It must be accompanied by some felt tone. It must be focusing on some feature of the phenomenal field. It must be forming some response to the phenomenal field. So in that way, we could say that consciousness is dependent on those factors of nama, in that it has to occur with those, together with those functions. You can't have consciousness occurring sort of in a zone of its own without those functions.
Right.
Even in the subtle meditative absorptions, there's still some feeling, either pleasant feeling or equanimous feeling. There's some perception. There is some volition. There's some act of attention.
So just to finish that off, so this term dependence, to a modern mind, it's always an efficient cause. One thing makes the next.
Yeah.
This seems to be more like a formal cause. It's a feature. So it's a bit like, I know a light and heat. They're not dependent on each other. They kind of co-emerge together. They are the sun and its rays, all of these sorts of metaphors.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Yeah. Okay. So so this word dependent perhaps isn't quite the way. It's not really sequentially dependent. It's more like in parallel, features of one another. Is that correct? Would that be a correct understanding? It may be this term dependent that causes the difficulty.
Well, it is said, I mean, the text does use the expression paticca, which is what we translate as dependent.
Right.
I still say that consciousness, that vijnana consciousness must have those functions of feeling, perception, volition, attention. And so consciousness is dependent on those functions.
Well, no, that would imply they were separate from consciousness, you see. The moment you say consciousness is dependent on them, then it would imply they're separate from consciousness and consciousness requires them to be. But in a sense, saying that consciousness is them. It's the function of consciousness to be them. So it's not a dependent relation. Not in the conventional sense of the word dependent.
I would have to reflect on this and try to disentangle it philosophically.
Yes, it's interesting to see. Well, because a number of questions.
But it is. I mean, the text always says that nama rupa is vijnanam paticca, vijnana paccaya nama rupang. That nama rupa occurs with consciousness as its condition. And consciousness occurs with nama rupa paccaya vijnanam. Consciousness is conditioned by nama rupa. So that seems to be suggesting that you could say intellectually you could distinguish them, but it's never the case that you have consciousness on one side, say nama on another side. They could exist separately, but just on some occasions they come together and support one or the other. They are inseparable. You never have one without the others.
Right. Thank you, Bhante. I think probably when one looks at the formal cause in the old models of causation prior to scientific models, the formal cause was like that. It wasn't an efficient cause, it was the formal cause. Because of one thing exists, it has these features, so it causes it. Thank you, Bhante. Well, there are a number of questions about this. If consciousness depends on material form,
Yeah.
how does rebirth linking consciousness work? Surely it cannot be present because there's no material form present.
Okay, in the Theravada Abhidhamma system, the consciousness is occurring, it occurs dependent on this physical body up to the time of death. Okay, then at the moment of death is followed immediately by the moment of rebirth. And so at that very moment of rebirth, consciousness passes away with the death consciousness from the person who has just died. And then the very next moment, it springs up as the rebirth consciousness in the new being, the being who has just taken conception. So that's in the Theravada Abhidhamma system. I'm not so sure that I agree with the idea of instantaneous rebirth, because from some of the cases that I've read by scientific investigators, there seems to be some kind of intermediate stage. But even in that intermediate stage, the consciousness is occurring based on a physical organism, but it's not a gross physical organism like our own, but it's occurring on something like a kind of astral body, a very subtle kind of material form that's invisible to us. But the person in this state has a sense of having a body, their body, which is a subtle replica of the body that has just passed away, like a kind of ghostly body. And so the consciousness is still occurring based on a physical body, but it's just not a gross physical body of the kind that we're acquainted with, but it's a subtle, like an astral body.
Yes, Bhante. Thank you. Then there's some questions about the Rupa. What is the nutritive essence in the 4 secondary types of Rupa? And what is the life faculty?
Okay, so it's said that all material form has some kind of nutritive essence. The Pali word is oja. So I guess it would mean some kind of ability to support life, to nourish life. So, I mean, I take some pieces of paper. So we would say for us as human beings, we wouldn't think of eating pieces of paper. But when I was living in Sri Lanka, where we had books on the bookshelf, our perpetual problem was invasion by termites coming through the back wall of the temple, and then in invisible tunnels coming up the back of the bookcase and turning the books into just dust. So obviously the paper has nutritive essence. And even we take things like maybe pieces of iron, we wouldn't think of eating, this is a nail clipper made out of iron. So I wouldn't think of eating it. But the iron is like one of the essential minerals for the body. And so even iron is part of nutritive essence. And so it said that all material phenomena have some kind of the capacity to serve as some kind of nutritional function. Maybe even plutonium or uranium, maybe not for us, but maybe for beings in some other planet would eat meals in which plutonium was an essential nutrient.
And then what is the life faculty?
Yeah, that is, I guess maybe it's the force that sustains life. I don't know how to explain it in contemporary terms, but I guess it was a basic idea within Indian physiology of the Buddha's time that the distinction between a living body and a dead body is that the living body has an operative jivit indriya, That is the life faculty. And when the life faculty is extinguished or destroyed, that marks death. Maybe in contemporary terms, we would say the life faculty would be maybe the beating heart. And what happens when the heart stops beating? Yeah, somebody with a knowledge of physiology might be able to explain the life faculty in contemporary terms. But I just rely back on the ancient Indian term, the life faculty.
So is the Jivitindriya dependent on consciousness? Would that be correct understanding? Because it's part of Rupa, so it might make...
I'd say certainly in human existence, the life faculty is the... Wait. Normally it's dependent on consciousness, but it's said that there's a special kind of meditative attainment called the attainment of the cessation of perception and feeling, in which all mental activity comes to an end, but the life faculty is still operative. And so that is what enables the person to emerge from that attainment and still remain the same individual. Yeah, but under normal circumstances, we would say that I think the life faculty is dependent on consciousness.
Thank you, Bhante. Then there's a technical question here. Can Bhante give a general explanation of the Patana and of the Tika Patana, maybe with one example?
Tika Patana. Okay.
What it is. Oh, you do? Okay. Thank you.
Well, let's just see the general explanation of Patana you can find here. Yeah, so what the Patana does is to lay out a scheme of 24 conditions. Well, let's get the English. Okay, so we have, for example, root conditions. So this would apply to those dharmas, those phenomena that serve as roots. So this would be the unwholesome roots, greed, hatred, delusion, and the beautiful roots, non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. Object condition applies to virtually anything, because anything can become an object. Predominance condition are particular factors that dominate the mind. Proximity condition, contiguity condition. This refers to each preceding moment of consciousness and its mental factors in relation to the immediately following moment of consciousness and its mental factors. So this means immediate precedence, the relationship between citta, the previous citta, and the following citta. Connascence condition or co-arisen condition are things that arise simultaneously. Mutuality condition is a condition, this is a subdivision of the connascence condition, where not only do the things arise simultaneously, but they arise in a way that each supports the other, each strengthens the other. Support condition gets rather complex since there are different subdivisions of this. Decisive support condition, the most important kind of decisive condition, would be the condition between things from, say, the past that have a determining influence on the present and things in the present that have a determining or a powerful influence on the future. So let's say, okay, so let's say I come across a book on Buddhism when I'm a youth in my 20s. Okay, so then that becomes a decisive support for a couple of years later, I formally become a Buddhist. Or let's say I listen to a discourse in which somebody praises the benefit of practicing generosity. And so that discourse becomes a decisive support. So a little bit later, then I go to the website and I make a donation to a worthy cause. Or I come under bad influence. Somebody says, give up your precepts, man, just enjoy yourself. So in this case, you could say the bad advice becomes a decisive support for my giving up precepts and engaging in unwholesome behavior. So decisive support in that way is a very broad condition. Okay, pre-nascence condition. This is the way in which the sense bases, the 5 physical sense bases, arise a split second before the arising of the types of consciousness that depend on those sense bases. So pre-nascence means pre-arisen. So the sense base, say, of the I arises at one moment. Then when that sense base of the I is still present, then I consciousness can arise based on the I. Post-nascence condition is the way a state of consciousness that arises afterwards can still sort of suffuse the body with vitality. Yeah, some of these others get a bit complicated. So nutriment condition, we'll just jump, is the way the 4 nutriments condition the things that depend on them. Like edible food is a condition for this body, and then contact is a condition for feeling. Mental volition is a contact for its associated mental states, and consciousness is the condition for nama-rupa. So that's the nutriment condition. Faculty is condition is the relationship between those mental functions called faculties and the states that are conditioned by them. Jhana condition is the relationship between the jhana factors and the states they condition. Path condition, the relationship between the path factors and the things they condition. Yeah, these others get to be very general conditions. So this maybe gives a very, very quick, a 5-minute overview of of the Patana system.
It's very impressive, Bhante. Thank you. Then there are only just 3 more general questions now. The first one is this term klesha. Is klesha a form of resultant karma? Could you say karma and its results when you say karma and klesha?
No, klesha is just the Sanskrit form of the Pali word kilesa, which are the defilements. Yeah, so we have the kilesas already here. So within the 12 factors of dependent origination, ignorance, craving, and clinging. So those are the kilesas or kleshas.
But aren't they the fruit of karma? Because doesn't karma create those? I mean, I realize that they're conditionally related, I guess, to use this.
You could say that in response to the results of karma, then kilesas or defilements can arise, but the defilements themselves are not the results of karma, but they are sort of the most fundamental factors that underlie even karma and the results of karma.
Thank you. Then there's just 2 general questions now. The first one is, I don't understand the 3-life interpretation related to the 12 factors of dependent origination. I know you haven't really gone into it much, but perhaps there's an opportunity.
I haven't gone into it much.
Well, in terms of how the 3 lives work, I'm not sure we ever dealt with it.
I think I dealt with that the entire 2 hours yesterday.
Well, not in terms of previous life, current life, future life, or maybe that's what they're asking for.
I know I don't know what I could say apart from what I said yesterday.
Okay. And then finally, Could understanding the 12 links be useful for reflecting in meditation?
I say certainly it could be used as a fruitful theme for reflection in meditation. And then the interesting question is, what can one actually see for oneself in the practice of meditation if one doesn't have the ability to see one's past lives or one's future lives? Let me see where they are. Okay, so it seems to me that what one could see pretty clearly was just by direct inspection is one could see consciousness or the interplay between consciousness and name and form. So the way this is developed in meditation, what in my experience, what is done rather is to investigate the 5 aggregates. So one takes consciousness as the aggregate of consciousness, and then one takes name to represent the 3 middle aggregates: feeling, perception, volitional activities, and form to represent the physical body. And so one could see from the physical body with its sense faculties, there arises mental activity. So through the eye and a visible form, you could see the arising of eye consciousness, and through a sound, so through the eye and the visible form, through their encounter, there will arise eye consciousness. And then if one looks closely at that experience of eye consciousness, one could see that there is present a feeling, some perception, and some volitional activities. And so one can then home in on and sort of isolate and pinpoint the feeling, the perception, the volition as specific objects of contemplation. So in this way, one could see the relationship between name and form and consciousness. Then, in a way, this is already covered. These 6 sense bases, one could see that how they function as a condition for contact, and how contact can function as a condition for feeling. Feeling serves as a condition for craving. One could see how if one flows with the stream of craving, it turns into clinging. And one could see how through clinging, one starts to give rise to various volitions, purposes, and tensions, which can be categorized as karmic existence. So I say that those links come into the direct inspection through the practice of insight meditation. What lies beyond the range of ordinary experience would be to see how karmic existence conditions birth, and how the ignorance or the volitional formations from a past existence condition consciousness in this existence.
Thank you, Bhante. That was wonderful. And that's all the questions from the audience. I'm very grateful for your patience in going through them all.
Ante, we have one request on the message to ask if we could get your Word document, the one that you were making some edits to.
Yeah, I will send that to you. Then you could share it with the group.
We'll share that with the YouTube.
Yeah, I sent it out originally about a week ago, or maybe a few days ago. But this morning I made some changes in it, and then while I was giving the talk, I also made some revisions. So I'll give you the newest version.
Wonderful. And so this concludes today's, I guess, program. We're a little bit early on time, And next month, we will be concluding the Abhidhamma in mind. It's amazing to believe that we've all come over a year journey together, with close to over 120 of us following each month, Bhante, and hundreds sharing the videos. So we're just so grateful again every time I have to say this, because I really sincerely mean this, your time and your energy and your wisdom to share with all of us. And as I've come to understand on the chat, they're very widely dispersed. I'm sure many of them already know you from your other work in the monastery, but many of us are meeting for the first time, and we're also very delighted that you have been so much effort continuing to study the Abhidhamma and mind. Next month, Bhante, would you like to share a little bit about what we will be doing? I know we have meditation down, but I'm wondering if you could give a little bit of plug in for next month on December 4th and 5th, Saturday and Sunday, 10 to 12 in the morning.
Yeah. So next month, we'll be coming to the last chapter in the Comprehensive Manual of Abhidhamma. So that chapter deals with the aspect of practice. And let's get the content. Yeah, so this is called the Kammatthana Sangraha. So the word Kammatthana means literally it's the subject of meditation. And so within the Theravada tradition, actually like all mainstream Buddhist traditions, there are two major types of meditation called samatha and vipassana, translated as calm and insight. And the detailed treatment of the meditation is not found in the books of the Abhidhamma Pitaka themselves, but rather it comes down in the commentaries, and then it gets systematized in the work called the Visuddhimagga, which is a large treatise of about 900 pages. And what this chapter does is to summarize the system of calm meditation and insight meditation from the Visuddhimagga. It summarizes it into just a few pages. And so we'll be going through the different subjects of meditation, the different stages of meditation, the different topics of meditation, the different stages of meditation. First in the sphere of calmness aimed at samadhi, and then the sphere of insight, which aims at panya, at wisdom and liberation. And so basically that's what we'll be covering.
Wonderful. So we'll be returning back on the same Zoom link. We'll be sending out the recordings for this week in about a week from now. And thank you to Stefan, who's our registrar, who's been taking care of that. And we'll also send you the new sort of edits that Bhante has done for today in the email. And we look forward to seeing you all again next month on December 4th and 5th from 10 to 12 in the morning. And we hope that we will continue together on our Dharma journey. We've asked Bhante for his recommendations on the Sarvastivadin Abhidhamma, and we're happy to share that the Kempo has agreed to continue on in 2022 in the summer period. So
Is that the monk in Canada?
this is the monk, I believe he's in Europe, Bhante.
Oh, I see, in Europe, yeah.
He's the German Bhante you recommended.
Oh, yes, right, I see. Yeah. Yes, I don't know him personally.
Who made the translation of Vasubandhu's 34th.
Right, yeah. Oh, that's good.
Yeah, so we did go try to find various different experts in the Sarvastivadin. Unfortunately, Venerable Dhammajoti could not come in because of time. He's got other things going on. But we did connect with the Kempo, and he's agreed to come on in the summer of 2022. And some of our friends on here have requested various different Dhamma topics to sort of go on, and I'll be compiling that. I've also left my email, and whatever service we can be in sharing the Dhamma and bringing great masters like Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi to expound on the Dhamma so that we can learn more. We would be delighted to be able to help in any way. Again, thank you so much for participating in today's program on behalf of Dharma College, and our gratitude to you, Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi.
Okay, thank you.